topics: energy productivity and how we integrate energy management and carbon management for productivity, because I think this is the key thing we have to do in New Zealand. So let's start off looking at this. I'm going to turn sideways, I can't really get this up on the screen here. I think anyone that looks at the OECD economic reports in countries and looks at the Productivity Commission, New Zealand Productivity Commission's analysis, is aware of that 20% gap we have in labour productivity with our cohort of OECD countries. We're struggling, and we have done so for the last 20 or 30 years. Really, we want to look at a whole bunch of aspects of this. It's not just labour productivity, although that seems to be the hot topic when people talk about productivity, and take more of a multi-factor productivity approach. But if you look at most of these areas, comparing New Zealand to OECD, and this is from the Productivity Commission from Paul Conway, you see ourselves struggling to keep up with the OECD, particularly so in some of those areas down the right there. So I read it this way: business sector services, finance, insurance, and these areas where we want to grow capability in New Zealand. So we do face a productivity challenge. And the Minister before he said, talk about energy targets. Well, great, we could do with that. But actually we need some energy productivity targets, because we've got to stop this slide in our productivity, our value add. And we've got to get some more out of energy as well. So we face some interesting challenges in New Zealand, but it is a multi-factor or a total factor productivity problem. And the big thing is we don't have what we call convergence, which is where our incomes, whether it's per capita or total income, starts to move in sync with other countries, particularly our cohort in the OECD. We don't need to be like India to be successful. We're successful already. We need to improve. So we have relative convergence, how our income moves with other countries, but we also have absolute convergence. All countries in the world start to derive more value from the resources they have, whether they're capital, labour, energy or material resources. So we can ask some questions, how does new technologies and productions help us improve productivity? And how particularly do we diffuse some of those best practices that work in industries that really are successful value producers to those that are less successful? And one of the big arguments coming out of the Productivity Commission's work is that New Zealand struggles to get its domestic spread of productivity up to domestic level, which is still behind an international level. So we're chasing our tail in New Zealand. And some of the best performers in this industry, in this room, actually almost need to share some of their skills with others, almost absorb some of them to get us all performing better, because we have a hell of a big challenge in front of us. So we have an issue of convergence and improving productivity in New Zealand. Let's look at energy productivity. So let's leave labour productivity, capital productivity, and look at this. So this is a slide we prepared at the IEA back in 2013 when we did the first energy market report. And on the bottom scale, we have thousands of US dollars per tonne oil equivalent. So it's a prime measure of energy productivity, albeit an aggregate one, which I don't really like, but we have it. And up the top, on the left-hand axis, we have tonne oil equivalent per capita. Sorry, the IEA works in oil equivalent. It's a lot of history there, but it's a unit of energy consumption. And I think you've all spotted New Zealand right now in the bottom left-hand corner. Yeah. So we're in a cohort with the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and the Slovak Republic. We're basically still agricultural economies, although they do have a fair bit of vehicle manufacturing and stuff as well. Right up the top there we have Canada, Finland, the United States, Norway and Australia. These are mineral producing countries. They're energy intensive activities, and they're also cold countries. They have a lot of heating as well. And in the middle of the pack you have the Central European Union countries, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Japan is in that cohort as well, France, and right at the end there's Switzerland. There's very good value add in making Swiss watches. And down the bottom we have the Mediterraneans. They're actually doing sort of better than us, but they're struggling too. So what's the lesson here? Well, partly what we do is a function of our structural mix, the resources we have to work with, but it's also a function of what we do. And you can see convergence here. Every economy in this set is moving to the right. It's deriving better value from its energy resources. And I think 2013 when we produced this, the first time people had actually sort of started thinking about energy productivity as a national function, as something which contributes to welfare, well-being and economic performance. So there we have it. And the fact of the matter is, there we are. We're alongside, we're probably one of the least productive of the OECD countries. Hey, that's not bad, 25 odd countries out of 208 countries. We're up in just about in the top 10%. We should be grateful. But if that divergence keeps happening, we're in trouble at some stage. We have a future to manage as well. So, there is a foundation for energy productivity in established economics, and really comes from the productivity models, which look at the relationship of capital, labour, energy and material assets in producing outcome or wealth in an economy. That's a model. But it says energy is one of these things that interacts with others to produce wealth or well-being. I've spent the last 7 or 8 weeks over the last 3 or 4 months looking at the power sector in the GCC. And there's been extraordinary investment there in high efficiency power plants.
Sorry, can you just explain GCC?
The Gulf Coalition Council. So it's the 6 oil exporting Arab countries. So Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman and UAE. Oil rich countries. But that's all they have. They have sand and nothing else. There's no water there. It's a tough place to live. But looking at these markets, we see massive investment in the power sector. So K is high, K is big. But the exponent, the beta there, which is the output elasticity of those investments, is actually quite poor because there's these big fantastic plants, but they're not being run well. Anyone involved in running the electricity market in New Zealand will take a look at this and say, you can run these so much better. And they could, and they would derive so much more wealth out of them. We can look at labour. So we're talking countries that have probably well over half their workers are imported, well skilled workers from other countries. There is a labour productivity challenge in those countries, full stop. We look at energy efficiency or energy productivity. E is the amount of energy, the little exponent there, epsilon I think it is effectively the output productivity of energy used there. It's actually quite high. We traditionally think of these countries as just burning oil to produce energy, whatever they want, and wasting it, but it's actually quite high. Well, some parts are extremely high, some parts are world leading. Some of the big industries there are world leading businesses in petrochemicals and things, so it's variable. And material, well, it's a country with oil, sand, and seawater, and not much else. And you need the oil to desalinate the seawater so that your population has fresh water. And so there's some really interesting challenges there. And I think it's getting harder and harder to improve the productivity of desalination because the 2 water resources are getting more and more saline. So they face some interesting challenges. But it's a good example of how these things all fit together. So can we have an energy target for New Zealand and the new NZs without having a productivity target? I'd be disappointed if that was all it was. I think we've got a bigger game here. And I think the people in this room, the business in the room, are the ones that are actually going to drive the change. Why is important is simply a little table to draw the difference between energy efficiency and energy productivity. And every time I try and put energy productivity back up the top of the right-hand column, it drops back down again. I don't know what to do there. But here, what do we do? We're deliberately chasing the value-adding processes and the outcomes that happen in our energy-using processes in the economy. And we're looking for strategic outcomes, not just energy savings. We want to improve product quality, output and profitability gains. These are actually needed by businesses, needed by shareholders, because that's how they stay in business, that's how they keep on delivering value. And we'll talk about the smelter afterwards, because I think it's an interesting case. We want outcomes which support organisation goals. Why can't energy efficiency, why can't bioenergy and the rest of it help directors of New Zealand businesses address health and safety issues right now? Because it's one of the big issues with the new Health and Safety Act. There's no reason this can't help contribute to those things that are burning issues for directors of businesses. And we want to deliver greater return on investment, making finance easier. This does this because it's delivering increasing value add, not just reducing energy consumption. While this improves productivity, it's also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's also delivering other environmental improvements. But it's doing it in a way that's more easily affordable by firms. So we're asking, can we rethink how we think about energy, energy processes, renewable energy, fossil energy, energy efficiency in businesses in more of a productivity sense, because it's actually going to drive change faster. So we want to start focusing on managing carbon alongside managing energy. COP21 creates a huge opportunity, and part of me sort of thinks, I don't really care what governments do anymore, because I think there's a global demand from businesses for low carbon production chains. People will want to start buying. In fact, something like 60% of the largest companies around the world already have policies in place where they are pursuing lower carbon production chains. So I think the business sector around the world is going to start driving this change anyway. How relevant is government right now? Well, government's got a big job to do still, but it should. And New Zealand is often a producer of low carbon products. Now, we had that work a few years ago when I think one of the British supermarket chains was challenging our lamb or something, and sort of said, look at the carbon footprint of the transport. Actually, the carbon footprint by the time we deliver it, even if we air freight it to the UK, is still lower than your local production. Irish beef bought onto this. They're starting to carbon footprint all their farms to prove the low carbon footprint of their products into UK and European Union markets. We're competing with Ireland, we're competing with Argentina, with Australia for beef. I don't think we're competing with most of those other countries where cows are in storage in winter and heated environments. So we do produce some low carbon products, but we don't really recognise it that well, because those opportunities to improve this and to get value from it lie within firms and businesses, not actually in aggregate. And a lot of the policy making happens at an aggregate level. And it needs to descend down to a level where the people in this room start getting business opportunities. Okay. Talking about aluminium. So this is some global benchmarking of aluminium processes. Looking at the top graph, on the right there, you see China. 17 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of aluminium. And on the right there, you see South American hydro-powered aluminium at 5 tonnes CO2 per tonne of aluminium. In the middle, the Middle East gas, associated gas-fired aluminium smelters about 11. What the speaker from Southern Ventures said before is absolutely right. We have one of the world's greenest aluminium smelters, and we're struggling to keep this damn thing in business. It's not a New Zealand problem, it's a global problem. It's a global challenge, a global productivity issue. And I don't have much time for people to say we need to shut the smelter down so households can have cheaper power. There is a dependence on this smelter globally, and we're part of a global productive process. The interesting thing is most of China's aluminium never leaves the country before it's processed. It's part of a huge Chinese manufacturing value chain. It's quite a different driver from aluminium production in most of those other countries, most of the other places. So we have some natural competitive advantage in productivity of low carbon products. Aluminium is just one example. It's the one that, actually it's the one I could find data on. You and I struggled to find some data on the wood and the paper processing industry, couldn't find anything. I know from a very good analyst who was working at the IEA, he said, you know, New Zealand produces the greenest steel. I said, really? He said, yes, because you mine it with hydroelectric power, you transmit it to the steel mill with electric power, it's a slurry pipeline, and while your actual process isn't the world's greenest aluminium process, the final product is. And we don't think like that about New Zealand's productivity. We don't think in terms of value chains, but sometimes we produce some of the world's greenest products. We need a market that wants to pay us for that. A bit like Ewan desperately needs a market for his facial carbon sink. So part of the work we're doing for EMANS for Ewan is developing this training package. And we're basically thinking, why can't New Zealand's library managers, manufacturing managers, retail managers, etc., be good energy managers? And we're developing a training program to upskill them to manage energy. It has some interesting challenges, but straight up, the specification was we want to deal with productivity, not just energy efficiency, and we want to start dealing with how carbon and energy management together can be optimised while proving productivity in a firm. And the firm is the sharp end, it's where the change really happens. Forget all the policy stuff. What really happens is when you change processes in a business or in a household. So, and our model is something like this. We have a process, a value chain, which includes extracting something and finally getting it to market. There are areas that have high energy intensity, there are areas with high carbon intensity, but there's also areas where you get higher value add. If you can understand where those things coincide, you can start to focus your effort on particular parts of your value process where there's high value, high productivity gains. We need that in New Zealand, but you can also address carbon reduction and reduce energy demand. So there are some good outcomes from thinking across some of these silos and integrating them. Right, there are 3 countries in this world that currently have energy productivity targets. The US is the first one. They're doubling their economic value created per unit of energy by 2030. Okay? Absorb that quickly. Australia, 40% improvement by 2030. Here's the interesting thing, it was a Liberal Party, I think it was one of their policies. The Labour Party said, we're going to do that too. And some political ginger group called Get Up, which I think was started by Australian housewives, who actually get up off that sofa, you lazy bastard, actually said, we're going to do this too. So there's cross-party support for a 40% improvement in energy productivity in Australia. China, this is the 3rd 5-year plan where they've set themselves an aggressive target for energy productivity improvements. I was at a meeting in 2006 when an official from the NDRC, the National Development and Reconstruction Commission of China, said we're going to start the 500 Industries program and reduce our energy intensity by 20%. 500 industrial processes in China. Think of Mao Zedong's 10,000 small ironworks, right? So we're going to completely restructure them and we're going to change our economy for higher productivity. So that was the first cycle. They had a 19.6% improvement in that time. The second one, 16% improvement target. They've set again 15%. They're spending more and more money each year to get there, but they have to because they're feeding 1.2 billion people. They need to get the productivity up. They need to get the resource dependence down. And they're serious about it. Okay, what do these 3 countries have in common for New Zealand? This is a hands up and give me an answer at the moment. Yeah.
Trading partners.
Yeah, these are our 3 largest trading partners. They've set themselves an aggressive energy productivity target. I hear the minister this morning, bless him, he's a good minister, talking about an energy target, not talking about an energy productivity target. You work it out. Okay. This is the picture we see from the GCC project, where the GCC economies are struggling to maintain their energy productivity. It's going down. Globally, the trend, the blue line is going up, and we're sort of saying, how far do you want to go? We are all competing in global economies, and we need to improve. Okay, there are a huge range of beneficiaries if we get this right. This is from the IEA's 2014 publication, capturing the multiple benefits of energy efficiency. There are international wins here. There are national wins for the New Zealand economy. There are big macroeconomic effects. Stern was right. I've sat in a room with 60 pretty hard-assed economists, including a whole bunch of rebound economists who didn't like to talk about energy efficiency. They were saying, no, these macroeconomic effects are real. Get the energy productivity right, and you do have big flow-on effects. There are sectoral gains, and there are individual gains for businesses and households. These are all worth having, but we need to think a little bit laterally about how we get them. Supply chains. This is some work from North America where the regulatory conditions around power system operation force a very high burden of proof on power companies that want to run energy efficiency programs. That's fantastic because you start to get some real evidence of how some of these programs perform. And this is out of, I think, New Hampshire, one of the utilities there. But you can see on the left the investment they've made in US dollars per megawatt hour in energy efficiency for their consumers, not for themselves, the consumers. And you can see the return on investments coming from reduced energy generation, distribution capacity, line losses, CO2 emissions, etc. And that substantially exceeds the investment they've made. So there's a return for power companies here if they get it right too. Yes, we are talking about lean manufacturing processes, and there's some really interesting material about this on the UK Carbon Trust website. And I'm conscious of time, I've got to keep moving, so I'm not going to go through that in detail, but there is some good work out there that we can learn from. Lean manufacturing plus carbon footprinting together get you some serious results. So at the firm, let's talk about a New Zealand business I think is quite topical. And I see that in March of this year, the Ministry of Health led another tender to have a look at Christchurch Hospital and its heat services. Great, it's been going on for 3 years, 4 years now? Anyone 3 years? Yeah, at least 3 years. And it's been going around in circles, and it's been teetering and tottering between the biomass boiler and coal boiler. There's a bigger issue here. And what does a yes we can solution look like? Well, it's a bit different. And frankly, it has jobs for 10 businesses in this room rather than just one. We have a bit of work to do to sort out Christchurch Hospital, I suspect. The end-use efficiency and the end-use provision of services. LED lighting, insulation improvements, indoor air quality is a big thing in hospitals. It's part of controlling disease vectors. Cooling, air conditioning and spacing systems in a place like that will be fighting each other. You will be putting heating into a space at the same time you're putting cooling into a space. Guarantee it. It happens in office buildings on the terrace still. Are these LEED or NABERS certified buildings? How good are these buildings? Have we tapped that cost-effective opportunity before we've even started asking about power and heat services for these buildings? I can't find any evidence that we have. So it seems we've missed out on the first chance for some productivity improvements. We could ask, well, what can we do locally? So what about putting PVs on the hospital that would at least cover the peak air conditioning load in summer? Makes sense? It's coincident, that's good. And what about some ground source heat pump solutions? Christchurch actually got quite good at using heat pumps, even though it has a cold, frosty winter climate. And most major buildings in Christchurch were running off heat pumps through winter and summer, often with LPG gas back up for frosty mornings, but it actually really worked. And I think we're sort of gone a little bit retrograde here, looking for a big boiler somehow that's going to solve this problem. There are smarter things we could do before we even ask about the boiler. Is there a balance of power demand and heat demand? Once you do all this, that suits a combined heat and power system, cogeneration system. In Europe, you would almost be mandated to ask this question because your local authority would be mandating you to connect to a district heating scheme or something like that. But you've got to do that after you've done these other things, and these other things I don't think have been done yet. So what size of combined heat and power plant do you end up with? And here's something you're going to hate me for. And I'm the guy that, I was part of the two guys that designed the Takatimu Primary School coal-fired boiler house back in 1980 something. So you can blame me for that. Fantastic, it's been converted to biomass. Why it went to lignite was that one of the board members had a line carrying business and he said, I'll arrange the coal delivery for free. And that convinced the local education board that we're going to go for a lignite coal-fired boiler house. So there you go. That's a bit of history. We've made a great change. But here's something you're going to hate me for. Why wouldn't that combined heat and power plant be running on light fuel oil? Why are we talking about a biomass or a coal boiler house when we should be talking about an integrated, highly efficient combined heat and power system for a hospital that gives you improved security of supply? Okay, no one's shooting me down yet. So maybe it's a good question to ask.
Carbon emissions, surely?
So convince me that it's worse than a coal-fired boiler house, because right now it looks like that's the way it's going.
I can't convince you there.
Fantastic, that's the only response that's acceptable. Good for you. Should be a bottle of wine in that for you or something. You're on. You will still have a biomass boiler there if that's what you want, because I don't think a sensible CHP plant will deal with the total heat load. So you will still have a biomass boiler there, but it will be part of a well-designed, integrated and economically productive process to get to the size of the right sort of boiler for the right sort of job. We will also improve public transport for health facilities. If you look at the distribution of health facilities in New Zealand back in the 1970s, there were twice as many hospitals, right? What we've done is we've transplayed physical building resources for helicopter ambulances, for improved mobility, a better roading system. And so public transport and utilities like hospitals are integrated. They're not separate things. So we would improve the public transport to the health facilities. And we'd also say, why can't all those district health board vehicles for the district nurses be electric vehicles? And at the same time, why wouldn't Christchurch City Council and the University and the Department of Social Welfare all get together and go to someone like Viola and say, hey, we need 1,200 electric vehicles in Christchurch. Will you provide the infrastructure? We know you'll provide the money, so it's not a capital cost to the New Zealand government. We know it actually works. It works in a city like Paris, where these vehicles have twice the utilisation occupancy of a private motor vehicle. We know these things work. We know we can fund fuel these with renewable electricity, and it'll probably offset the oil we use in the CHP plant. So where's the joined up thinking that's going on? Because that's where we really get the productivity opportunities. So there's a high ambition on that tender that we saw let the other day. Because frankly, what those people that win that work should be doing is a very complicated question that requires a fair bit of careful thinking. But it's not a simple do we need a boil thing.
The spec didn't even include that option.
I didn't write the spec, you're talking to the wrong guy. Good to see you, Ian. Here's an interesting link. I won't go through this, so I think we're running out of time, aren't we? I think most of you have seen it before, but here's what happens if you get it right. You do your homework, you really understand the process, you get some good monitoring, you understand the external resources, understand your process and its relationship with the renewable resources that we have to work with, and all of a sudden we get some transforming productivity effects happening. It's a good example. Yes, okay, this is something from inside EAL, and we look at making this business work. And here's the deal, most businesses fall short of achieving their growth objectives or revenue profitability. It's a normal thing. Happens to government too. Why is this so elusive? Why do only 20% really have success? Because it's hard work, it's tricky, it's not easy. But you know, we don't consider the opportunities well. Right? And we don't look at our core business and say, what are all the ways that we could apply our core business to the opportunities that are out there? And we ask ourselves that all the time, is there a better way of delivering what we could do? I think that's an important thing. The second thing is there's an organisational infrastructure that can't support successful execution. So you do need to gear up to do big things. I think someone like Jack Welch or someone who said you need big organisations for big things. We wouldn't have Trent gas turbines driving most of the aircraft fleet around the world if Rolls-Royce hadn't been big enough to develop an advanced gas turbine technology. It's that simple. Sometimes you need to collaborate. And I think there's a big opportunity for collaboration across the skill set I see in this room. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to get out there and find better ways of doing business. That's me talking to myself as much as talking around the audience. We need to learn from the leaders in this business. There are people in this room who really are leaders in their sector, and we need to learn from them. I think there's a role for industry groups here to highlight productivity opportunities, highlight what's really working overseas, and work with their sectors to understand what are they actually delivering. It frustrates me a little bit, so 300 odd members of the Energy Management Association, we don't actually really understand their contribution to New Zealand productivity. And the last one is a plug for the Energy Manager professional course. We've got our first course, it's the pilot, the prototype, coming up on the 15th to the 21st of June. There's one space left, all right? So you all need to go to this course. So only one of you can go. We should start a bidding war for this year. But thank you very much. Thanks for putting up with me.